I want to be honest with you before I start this. I've told this story to exactly 4 people. My girlfriend, my older brother, one of my best friends, and a park ranger whose face I still think about sometimes, the way it changed when I described the third night. That ranger didn't look at me like I was exaggerating. He didn't even look surprised. He just wrote everything down slowly, asked me to repeat 2 specific things, and said something under his breath that I didn't fully catch. I'm not the kind of person who goes looking for a scary story to tell. I'm a graphic designer. I make logos and marketing materials for small businesses. I spend most of my time staring at a screen in a home office with a plant that keeps almost dying and coming back. My life is boring on purpose. I chose boring because before I chose boring, life had a way of handing me too much chaos. So the October I'm going to tell you about, I was not expecting it. I was not prepared for it. I just wanted 5 days of silence. That was the plan. 5 days on a section of the Appalachian Trail right down near the Virginia and Tennessee border. I'd hiked sections before, never alone, never more than 2 nights. This felt like the right time to push it. I was 31, burned out, running on caffeine and the low hum of anxiety that comes from sitting under fluorescent light for too many consecutive years. My girlfriend, Mara, thought I was insane. Not the trip itself. She gets outdoors. She grew up camping, but the alone part, she kept saying, just wait for me and we'll go in spring. And I kept saying, I need it now. I need the quiet now. We compromised. She tracked my GPS locator the whole time. I checked in every evening at 6, 2 missed check-ins, and she calls search and rescue. That was the deal. I drove out on a Thursday morning in early October, parked at the trailhead around noon. The air had that particular October thing going on, cold enough to feel clean, warm enough in the sun that you unzipped your jacket by the second mile. The leaves were at absolute peak. I'm talking ridiculous amounts of orange and red, like someone had soaked the entire mountain in watercolor paint and hadn't quite let it dry. I remember standing at the trailhead, adjusting my pack straps, thinking this is exactly right. This is exactly what I needed. The first day was perfect. I mean that in the truest sense of the word. I walked 8 miles, saw 3 deer in a clearing around mile 4, stopped for lunch on a flat rock with a view that went on for what felt like forever, and made it to a lean-to shelter by late afternoon. There were 2 other names in the shelter log from that week. I wrote mine that detail matters later. I ate, hung my food, watched the sun go down over the ridge until it was just that deep blue left in the sky, and went to sleep to the sound of wind moving through the trees above me. I was asleep by 8. I slept better than I had in months. I noticed the first thing the next morning. Now, I want you to understand something about me. I am meticulous. Annoyingly so, Mara would back me up on this. When I'm camping, I have a system. Boots come off outside the tent, left boot, then right boot, and I place them heel to heel facing outward from the tent door. Every time, without thinking. It's just what I do. I've done it since the first trip I ever took. It's as automatic as anything I've ever done in my life. When I unzipped the tent that morning, my right boot was on its side, about a foot away from where I'd left it, turned to face the tent instead of away from it. I stood there for probably 30 seconds, just looking at it. The left boot was where it always was. Just the right one was moved. I looked around the immediate area. Nothing disturbed in the leaves around the tent. No animal tracks, just the boot. Moved, facing the wrong way. I picked it up and put it on and told myself an animal had knocked it, a raccoon maybe, and went on with my morning. I hit the trail by 6:30. Good pace. The second day was supposed to be the hardest in terms of elevation, and I wanted it behind me before the afternoon. The trail was mostly empty. I passed a couple going the opposite direction around mile 2, older, maybe late 50s, both with trekking poles, matching packs, clearly knew what they were doing. We said good morning, standard trail stuff. The second person I passed going the other direction was alone, male, maybe my age, shorter than me, moving fast. He slowed when he saw me, which I thought was a little unusual. Most solo hikers just give the head nod and keep moving. This guy actually stopped. He looked at me kind of sideways and asked, "You the one hiking solo back north of here?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Where are you camping?" I told him I was making for the next shelter, probably around mile 12. He nodded slowly, and then he said something that I let myself forget about for the next 6 hours. He said, "Keep your head up tonight," and then he kept walking. I almost turned around and asked him what he meant. I almost did. Instead, I kept going, and by lunchtime, I had convinced myself he was just being a friendly trail person. People say odd things out there. The mountains make people philosophical. He probably just meant watch out for bears or something. I left it alone. The trail that afternoon was beautiful and brutal. I gained about 2,000 feet of elevation in 4 miles, and by the time I crested the ridge and felt the wind hit me, my legs were rubber and my lungs were complaining loudly. But the view from the top there are no words for that view. Just ridge after ridge of mountains going to the horizon, every single one lit up in fall color, and a hawk turning slow circles in the air below me. I stood up there for 10 minutes just breathing. Made the shelter by 4:30. There was nobody else there. I signed the log, set up my sleeping pad, hung my food, and built a small fire. I ate, checked in with Mara at 6, told her the boot thing, and she said what I expected her to say, which was that a raccoon moved it and I was overthinking it. I probably laughed. I probably agreed. I let the fire die down around 8 and got into the sleeping bag. I fell asleep fast. I always do on day 2 of a trip. After the hardest day, your body just quits on you and you're out. But I woke up sometime later. I can't say exactly what time. Still dark, maybe 1 or 2 in the morning. I lay there for a second, not sure what woke me, and then I heard it. Footsteps in the leaves, about 25 feet away. Slow, deliberate, moving around the outside of the shelter in a wide arc. My brain did what brains do. Deer, it said. Bear, raccoon, something normal. I lay still and listened. The footsteps slowed and stopped. I counted to 30. Nothing. 60. Nothing. I shifted slightly, adjusted the sleeping bag. The footsteps started again immediately after I moved. That's the detail that changed it. They started right when I moved. I lay completely still for maybe 15 minutes. The footsteps circled twice more, slow, never coming closer than 20 feet, never going further than 40. Then they stopped, and I didn't hear them again. I lay awake until gray light started coming through the gaps in the shelter boards. And then I got up, looked around the area, and found nothing. No tracks in the soft earth that I could definitively say were human. Nothing. I packed faster than usual and was on the trail by 6. Day 3. This is the day the feeling became a thing I couldn't argue myself out of. It started small. Around mile 3, I found the first one. A piece of orange cord, the kind hikers use for tent guy lines, tied around a branch at shoulder height beside the trail, tied in a specific knot, not a random tangle, looped and tied deliberately. I stopped and looked at it. It wasn't unusual in itself. Hikers mark things sometimes, but something about it made me not want to touch it. I kept walking. Mile 4, another piece of orange cord. Same height, same knot. On the opposite side of the trail, mile 5, a third one. I stood at that third one for a full minute. The 3 pieces of cord were spaced roughly a mile apart, and they were clearly from the same source, same color, same diameter, same knot. I thought about turning around and hiking out. I actually thought about it, but it was 12 miles back to the car on terrain I'd already covered versus 7 miles forward to a road crossing where I could have Mara come get me. And honestly, I was still not 100% sure I wasn't just having a paranoid trip. 3 pieces of cord on a trail. It's weird, but it's not a threat. I kept going. What I found around mile 6, I can't explain as anything other than what it obviously was. There was a small clearing just off the left side of the trail, maybe 40 feet in. I almost didn't see it. A flash of white caught my eye between the trees. I stepped off trail and pushed through maybe 15 feet of brush and came out into this small flat space, maybe 20 by 20 feet, carpeted in dead leaves. In the center of the clearing, arranged in a line, were 4 objects: a glove, a snack bar wrapper, a piece of duct tape folded into a square, and a carabiner. The glove was mine. I'd lost it on day 1, took it off to adjust a strap, forgot to put it back in my pocket. I didn't even notice I'd lost it until that moment. The wrapper, I had to think hard, but yes, same brand, same flavor as the bars I'd packed. The duct tape, I couldn't say for certain. The carabiner, was one I didn't recognize. Someone had been following me since day one. They had picked up what I dropped and arranged it here, 40 feet off the trail, in a line, like an offering, or like proof. Like they wanted me to find it and understand that they'd been there the whole time. I felt that in my chest in a way I have not felt since. That specific cold, that isn't about temperature. That recognition that you are not safe. I took a picture of the clearing with my phone. I pocketed my glove, and then I walked quickly, but not running because I didn't want to run back to the trail. And I kept moving. I sent Mara a message that said, "Something weird, on trail, heading to road crossing early, maybe tomorrow morning. Don't worry yet." She called back immediately. I didn't answer. I needed to focus. The trail felt different after that. Every sound in the brush registered. I stopped twice, thinking I heard footsteps behind me, turned around, saw nothing. The afternoon light started going golden, and I realized I had 3 more miles to the next shelter and I wasn't going to make the road crossing before dark. I set up my tent about half a mile from the shelter, off the trail in a spot you couldn't see from the path itself. I didn't sign the shelter log that night. That's important. I ate cold, didn't want to fire. I sat in the dark and listened to the mountains go quiet. Called Mara at 6, told her most of it. Her voice was careful the way it gets when she's scared, but doesn't want me to know she's scared. She wanted me to call the ranger station. I said I would if anything else happened. I told her I was going to get up at 4 a.m. and be at the road crossing by 8. I got into the tent and lay there with my headlamp in my hand. Not on, just in my hand. I don't know when I fell asleep. What woke me was silence. And that sounds like the wrong answer, but it isn't. The forest had been running this constant low-level background track all night. Insects, wind, branches, the occasional crack of something in the distance. And somewhere in the middle of the night, that sound just stopped. All of it. At once. Like someone hit a switch. I opened my eyes in the total dark. Didn't move. Didn't breathe more than I had to. And then from maybe 15, 20 feet away, just outside the tent, so quiet I could have convinced myself I imagined it. A voice said my name. Not hey, not hello, my name. Just that. Said the way you say a name when you're calling someone over. Calm, almost conversational, like we knew each other. Every hair on my body stood up. I mean that literally. I felt it happen. I didn't answer. I gripped the headlamp so hard my knuckles ached. I waited. The silence held for what felt like an enormous amount of time. And then a second time, same voice, same calm, same volume. I knew 2 things immediately. First, the only place my name existed out here was in the shelter log. I'd written Tyler M., solo, October 7. Whoever this was had read it, they'd planned this. Second, if they had wanted to harm me, they had had 3 nights. They were choosing this particular thing, coming close, saying my name, waiting. I don't know what that means. I still don't. I lay completely still for maybe 2 full hours. I know because I watched the numbers on my phone flip in the dark. I had it in airplane mode to save battery, but the clock still worked. The forest stayed silent the entire time. Nothing else came. No more voices. No footsteps I could hear. Just that absolute, unnatural, quiet pressing down on the tent. At 4:15, I packed. I moved slower and more carefully than I have ever moved in my life. Every zipper, every buckle, every step. I got my pack on in the tent, then unzipped the door and came out, fast and low, headlamp on, turning immediately in a full circle. Nothing. Trees, dark. Fog starting to form low around the roots. I walked for 4 hours, never once turned off the headlamp, made the road crossing at 8:14. A woman in a pickup truck, she was maybe 60, had a lab in the passenger seat, saw me standing at the road and pulled over without me even having to wave. I must have looked bad. She asked if I was okay. I said I needed a ride to the nearest town. She didn't ask a single question, just moved the dog to the back and drove me 20 minutes to a little mountain town where there was a diner. I called the ranger station from the diner parking lot. The ranger I spoke to was a man in his 40s, soft-spoken, took notes on an actual notepad. I told him everything in order. The boots, the person on the trail who said to keep my head up, the footsteps on night 2, the cord markers, the clearing with my objects arranged in a line, and the voice on night 3. I told him exactly what the voice said. He read it back to me. He asked me to confirm the location of the shelter log. He asked what I wrote specifically, whether I included that I was solo. I said yes. He went quiet for about 4 seconds. Then he said, "We've had some reports from that section in the last 2 months. I'm going to pass this on." I asked him what kind of reports. He said, "I'd rather not characterize them specifically, but you did the right thing leaving." That was it. That was all he gave me. I've tried to find any public records about incidents in that area during that period. I've found nothing. Either nothing was made public, or the reports didn't lead anywhere, or I'm looking in the wrong places. Mara picked me up from that diner. She held my face in her hands and looked at me for a long time when I got in the car. She said, "You look like you didn't sleep for 3 days." I said about 60% of that is accurate. We drove home mostly in silence. She held my hand across the center console the whole way. I haven't done a solo trip since. I don't think I will for a while, maybe ever. I'm not sure what that person wanted. I'm not sure why they announced themselves the way they did instead of just acting. I think about that a lot, the deciding not to act when they could have, what that means about them. What I know is this, and I say this for anyone who is planning a solo trip out there. Sign the log if you want to, but be careful what you put in it. Go with someone, and if you ever hear footsteps circling your tent in the dark and you can't explain them, don't wait for the 3rd night. Don't do what I did. The thing I keep coming back to is the sound Del made when he came back from the woodpile. I've heard people scared before. I've heard the kind of scared that comes from a jump scare, the short, hard gasp, and then the embarrassed laugh afterward. I've heard genuinely frightened people, an accident on the highway once, the sound someone makes when the world stops making sense for a second. This was different. Del is 6'2" and has worked construction since he was 19 years old. He's the kind of person who doesn't make sounds like that. And the sound he made coming back through that back door, I can't actually spell it out for you. It wasn't a word. It was the sound of a person who has seen something that has reorganized their understanding of the world they live in. But let me back up. Let me explain how we got there, because the beginning matters for understanding the rest. The 4 of us had been talking about a long weekend trip for almost a year. My fiance Marcus and I, and our friends Del and Petra, who'd been together for 3 years by that point, we all lived within 20 minutes of each other, worked different schedules, and always ended up rescheduling around something. But that November, the stars aligned. Del and Petra could take Friday and Monday off. Marcus had banked 3 vacation days. I work remotely, so timing was mine to arrange. We found the cabin on a rental site, not Airbnb, one of the smaller regional ones. It was listed as authentic mountain cabin, deep holler setting, complete privacy, wood stove heat, no Wi-Fi, creek access. $70 a night. For November in the mountains of Southwest Virginia, we thought we'd gotten an absolute steal. We drove out on a Friday afternoon. Marcus drove, Del rode up front. Petra and I shared the back seat with our feet up on the cooler. The first 2 hours were highway, easy, but the last 40 minutes was a different planet. The GPS took us off the main road, onto a county road, then off that onto a gravel road, then onto what I can only describe as a dirt track, barely wide enough for Marcus's Jeep, with tree branches scraping both sides. The holler the cabin sat in was at the end of that track. By the time we got there, the sky was that deep dark gray that happens before full dark in the mountains, and the trees were so close and so tall that we lost the light earlier than we should have. The woman who was renting the cabin met us at the gate. Want to be specific about the gate. It was a proper farm gate, iron on a post, and it was at the start of the final driveway leading to the cabin. She was standing outside the gate, not inside it. When Marcus pulled up and rolled down his window, she handed him a key over the top of the gate. She didn't open it herself. She was older, 70 at least, maybe more, wrapped in a coat despite it not being that cold yet. She had the particular look of mountain people who have spent their whole lives in the same place, a kind of settled quality, like the land has gotten into the face and the posture and made itself permanent there. She was perfectly polite. She went over the basics, wood stacked on the back porch. Water pump has a trick to it. Hot water takes 3 minutes. No cell service, but there's a landline for emergencies. Marcus was taking notes on his phone out of habit, even without service. Then she said it. Petra, right in my ear, said, And I leaned forward toward Marcus's window and said, "Sorry, don't go below the creek." The woman looked at me, and this is the part I always have trouble describing, because I'm not sure I have the right words for the look, like I'd asked a stupid question. Not a rude look. Just the look someone gives when they thought they'd been clear. She said, "The creek runs along the north side of the property. Just stay above it after dark." She smiled then, a small one, and said she hoped we'd enjoy it, and walked back up the drive toward a truck parked well behind the gate. We looked at each other. Petra did this thing with her eyebrows. Dell said, "Bear territory, probably." Marcus said, "Makes sense." We drove up to the cabin. It was beautiful. I want to say that because I don't want you to think we'd rented some crumbling disaster. The cabin was maybe 80 years old, solid hewn log construction, a covered porch running the full front, 2 bedrooms, a main room with the wood stove, a kitchen that worked, a bathroom that was small but fine. Somebody had put real care into it over the years. Quilts on the beds, cast iron in the kitchen, shelves of old books. It smelled like wood smoke and something herbal I never fully identified. We all loved it immediately. Dell got the wood stove going in about 10 minutes. Petra started dinner. Marcus and I sat on the porch with bourbon and watched the dark come all the way in. That first night was genuinely great. We ate well, told old stories, laughed too loud for a mountain hollow, and fell asleep around midnight. I slept deeply. If anything happened that night, I wasn't awake for it. Day 2, Saturday. We woke up to frost on the porch and clouds sitting low in the gap between the hills. Made a full breakfast, went for a walk along the creek above it, I noted, and spent the morning exploring. The property was bigger than I'd expected. About 10 acres according to the listing, mostly wooded, with a cleared area around the cabin and a meadow running down to the creek. Beautiful in the bleak November way, stark, honest. After lunch, Dell offered to bring in more wood from the back porch pile and restock the indoor stack. It was maybe 2 in the afternoon, good light. I was doing dishes, Petra was reading, Marcus had fallen asleep in the chair by the stove. He was gone maybe 8 minutes. When he came back, that sound, I turned off the water immediately. Petra looked up from her book. Marcus snapped awake. Dell was standing just inside the back door, and he looked like somebody had told him something. He didn't have a way to process. His face had that particular blank quality that isn't emptiness but is actually too full, like the expression a computer makes when it's overloaded and just goes quiet. He said, "There's something in the trees." We all went to the back windows. About 60 feet from the house was the tree-lined solid wall of bare November trees and the shadow of the underbrush behind them. I couldn't see anything unusual. The woodpile was there. The cleared ground between the house and the trees was empty. Dell said, "You have to come outside." We went outside. He walked us to about 20 feet from the tree line and pointed. High up, maybe 8 or 9 feet off the ground, tied to a branch with what looked like wire, were the skins, animal skins, cleaned, flattened, stretched between small sticks, 5 of them that I could count from where we were standing, arranged in the branches of 3 adjacent trees. They'd been there long enough that the color had leached out of them. But they weren't old, they weren't rotting, weren't in pieces. The wire was relatively shiny in what gray light there was. Someone had put them there recently and arranged them, not just hung them, spread in a pattern that I couldn't say had a clear meaning, but clearly had intent behind it. None of us said anything for a minute. Marcus finally said, "Poachers? Like somebody processing game out here?" Dell said he'd never seen anything like this in his life and he'd hunted since he was 12. Petra pulled out her phone reflexively, then remembered there was no service. We went back inside. We told ourselves what you tell yourself. There's a reasonable explanation. It's hunting stuff. The woman mentioned staying above the creek. This is probably why she's embarrassed about whatever eccentric thing is going on with her property. We talked ourselves down from the ledge over the next hour, the way 4 people who like each other can, and made a plan to ask her about it when we left on Monday. Marcus and Dell took a longer walk that afternoon, downstream along the creek, just to see more of the property. They came back quieter than they'd left. It wasn't until we were sitting with drinks that evening that Marcus told me what they'd found on the other side of the creek. A structure. Small, maybe the size of a garden shed, but not built from lumber, built from what he described as whatever was around. Branches, bark, scrap wood, what looked like canvas or a tarp, with a path worn to it from the creek bank. The door, if you could call it, that was a piece of plywood propped against the opening. Marcus had pushed it aside enough to see inside. He described a bedroll, a bucket, empty cans, a fire ring. Somebody had been living there not long ago, maybe not at all gone. We didn't talk about leaving that night. I don't know why. Maybe because it was dark by then and the drive out felt worse in the dark than whatever was here. Maybe because we're the kind of people who don't want to be the people who overreact to things. Marcus checked that all the windows were latched. Dell put the wood stove poker next to the couch. We ate dinner and watched each other's faces. I think it was 11 when we first saw him. The cabin had a window over the kitchen sink that faced the back of the property the same direction as the tree line with the skins. I was filling a glass with water, lights on inside, so the window was essentially a mirror, when I caught something in the reflection, movement, just outside the ring of light from the porch lamp. I turned and looked directly through the glass. He was standing at the edge of the light, completely still, facing the house. I couldn't see his face clearly. The porch light was behind him and to his left, so he was half in shadow. What I could see was his outline. Tall, thin, very thin, long coat or a long shirt of some kind, hard to tell. The proportions were, I keep coming back to that word, proportions. Something about the way the limbs connected, the length of the arms. I've tried to write it off as the light or distance or the dark messing with my eyes. I don't entirely believe those explanations. I said one word, Marcus. He came over, looked, and his face did something very controlled and still. He said quietly, "Hey, Dell, come here." We all stood in the kitchen, looking at this figure, standing outside in the dark. He didn't move. We didn't move. We stood there probably 2 full minutes, nobody speaking, until Dell reached over and flipped off the kitchen light so the figure couldn't see us watching. He stood there for another 5 minutes. We tracked him from the dark kitchen. Then he walked slowly, not hurrying, back toward the tree line and was gone. We locked everything. Barricaded the back door with a chair under the handle because the lock looked flimsy. We sat together in the main room and talked about what to do. Calling the landline for what? To say there was someone outside? Marcus said whoever it was hadn't done anything yet. Dell said hadn't done anything yet was doing a lot of work in that sentence. We started talking about the skins again, about the structure below the creek, about the woman who wouldn't open her own gate. About an hour later, when things had gone quiet and we'd nearly convinced ourselves the man had gone back to the structure below the creek, we heard it. From the back of the cabin, from behind the locked back bedroom, scratching. Not panicked, not fast, slow, methodical scratching, the kind of sound a person makes when they're not hurrying because they don't have to. I am not going to pretend I didn't lose it a little. I did. Petra had her hand over her mouth. Dell had the stove poker in his hand. Marcus went to that bedroom door and pressed his ear against it, then held one finger up at us and mouthed something I couldn't read. He stepped back and said very quietly, "I don't think he's in there. I think that sound is on the other side of the wall." He was right. The back bedroom shared a wall with the back porch. The scratching was on the exterior of the house, someone at the back porch dragging something along the outer wall. We didn't sleep, not really. Dell sat in a chair facing the back of the house with that poker until 4 a.m, and then Marcus took over. I lay on the bed, fully dressed, with Petra's hand in mine. We didn't talk, we just listened. The scratching stopped around 1 and didn't start again. Sunday morning. We decided unanimously to leave. No discussion, no debate. Pack, go, address it from somewhere with cell service and a chain on the door. Marcus went out first to pull the Jeep around. He came back in and said he needed everyone to stay calm. The front passenger tire had been let down. Slowly, it wasn't flat entirely, but it was maybe at a third of normal pressure, and the valve stem cap was sitting on the hood of the car, placed there, not fallen, placed, like a message. We have time, We know where you are. There is no hurry. Marcus had a portable inflator in the back. It took 20 minutes to bring the tire up while the rest of us stood on the porch watching every direction. We loaded everything in the Jeep and drove out. I called the woman's number the second Marcus got service on the highway. She picked up on the second ring. I explained what had happened. All of it. The figure, the scratching, the tire. I was not calm. She was. She said calm as anything. I'm sorry. I told you not to go below the creek. And then, did any of you open the back room? I said no, and the silence on the other end of the phone lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. Then she said and hung up. I still don't know what was in that back room. I've tried to look up the property records, the owner's name, any reports associated with that address. What I found was this. That property has changed hands 4 times in the past 6 years. The previous owner, before this woman, filed a complaint with the county sheriff about an unauthorized person living on the property. The complaint was marked resolved. The one before that had rented it briefly as a vacation property and then taken the listing down without explanation. I found one review from a couple who'd stayed there 2 years ago. The review was 3 words and a 1-star rating. No other details. Dell doesn't talk about it. Petra brought it up once, about 3 months after, and started crying in the middle of the sentence and didn't finish it. Marcus told me a few weeks later that what bothered him most wasn't the man at the edge of the light or the scratching or any of that. What bothered him most was how calm the old woman was on the phone. She wasn't scared. She wasn't surprised. She was inconvenienced. The way you are when someone in your house breaks a rule you've explained clearly and then deals with the consequences that you already knew were coming. Like, she told us not to go below the creek because she knew, not guessed, knew. Whatever lived in that structure below the creek, whatever came to the edge of the light and stood there in the dark watching 4 people through a kitchen window, she'd been managing it, keeping it at bay with rules she didn't fully explain to her guests. And 2 of those rules were, stay above the creek after dark and don't open the back room. We followed one of them. I genuinely believe that's the only reason we're here to talk about it. My grandmother Vera died in March. She was 96 years old, and she'd been sharp until the last 2 months when something in her finally let go and she went soft and far away and then was gone. The funeral was in the small town nearest to the property, a town of maybe 800 people, a Baptist church, a general store, a diner that'd been there since the 50s. My mother flew in from Florida, where she'd lived for 30 years. She stood at the graveside with her hands folded in front of her and her face arranged in a very particular way that I recognized from childhood as the way she looked when she was feeling something she had decided not to feel. After the service, the attorney told us that Vera had left the property to me, not my mother, me. My mother didn't look surprised. She actually looked relieved. She said, just sell it, Elaine. You don't need to go up there. Just find an agent and sell it. I asked why she'd never taken me there. We'd spoken about the property my whole life, the mountain house, the family land, 4 generations of mountain people on my mother's side. She always said someday, and then someday never came. She said it's just not a place I wanted to go back to, and then she said it again, just sell it. Don't go yourself. That is obviously exactly the wrong thing to say to me. My husband Joel and I drove up in early April, 3 weeks after the funeral. Eastern Kentucky in early April is the kind of beautiful that hits you sideways, everything starting to come green at once, the whole mountain exhaling after winter, waterfalls running hard on every ridge from snowmelt. We drove the last 20 miles on a 2-lane that followed a creek bed up through the mountain, through a small town where we stopped for gas, and where I made the mistake of mentioning where we were headed to the man behind the counter. He knew the property. He knew the name. He said it. He said, my grandmother's name, the way you say the name of someone you have complicated feelings about. Not cold, not warm, careful. He asked if we were relations. I said I was her granddaughter, inherited the place. He handed me my change and said, and these are his exact words, Vera kept things in order. Long as it's been kept up, there won't be any trouble. I asked what he meant by that. He said just that she was particular about the place, kept things right. I thanked him. We got in the car. Joel said, that was cryptic. I said, everyone up here is like that, and I didn't think any more of it for the next hour. The drive up the hollow to the property was longer than I expected. The road turned from asphalt to gravel to packed dirt, and then to something barely qualifying as a track, rutted from spring rain. Forest so close on both sides that the branches swept the car roof. Then the trees opened up and there was the house. I'd seen pictures, old ones, black and white, from when my mother was a child. The house in the pictures was clean and maintained and had a proper garden running along the front. The house I was looking at, well, it had survived. That's the word I'd use. The structure was sound. I could see that from the car. Solid timber frame, stone foundation, the porch sagging only slightly at one end. But the garden was wild, years of growth, and the vines had taken the lower half of the back wall, and the overall impression was of a place that had been coping in the absence of its person. Managing, but barely. We spent the first hour just doing a walkthrough. The inside was dim, the windows were small, mountain style, made for insulation, not light, but it wasn't the disaster I'd half expected. My grandmother had clearly been in this house until recently. The furniture was old but arranged. The kitchen had supplies still on the shelves. The wood stove was clean. And then there were the other things, the things I didn't understand at first. The door frames. Every interior door frame in the house had something carved into the top rail. Not decorative, not the kind of thing a woodworker does to show off. These were specific symbols, cut deliberately and deeply. Circles with lines through them, recurring shapes, something that looked like it might have been letters in a script I didn't recognize. I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the main room, running my finger along one, and thought, mountain tradition, folk art, old superstition stuff. I knew mountain people had traditions. I didn't know yet what traditions. The windows on the inside sill of every window, running in a line, were iron nails. Old square head nails, the kind they stopped making 100 years ago, placed in a row with the points facing outward toward the glass. I counted them at one window, 7. At the next, 7. At every window, 7 iron nails pointed out, and the floors. Along the base of every exterior wall, in the gaps between the floorboards and the baseboard, a fine powder. I touched it, salt. I took pictures of all of it. Joel was doing the practical inventory, checking the roof joists, the foundation stones, the chimney flue, and I was moving from room to room, feeling a slow gathering in my stomach that I kept telling myself was just the weight of the place, the age of it, my family's history in the walls. There was a locked room, back of the house, door set into the wall beside the staircase, small iron lock, old but functional. I had a ring of keys from the attorney. The third one I tried worked. Inside was a small room, maybe 8 by 10 feet, that had been used as a study. A desk with a chair, a shelf of jars, a lamp with a tin shade, and on the desk and the walls, and shelved carefully in a row of dark green journals, 30 years of my grandmother's handwriting. I sat down and started reading. Joel called me for dinner and I didn't hear him. He came and found me. I'd been in that room for 3 hours. What I can tell you about the journals is this. My grandmother Vera was not an eccentric old woman with folk superstitions. She was a woman who had spent 40 years in a careful, methodical, essentially empirical study of something that lived on the mountain above her family's property. She had documentation going back to her own grandmother's time, secondhand accounts in her notes about what the mountain people of the hollow called it. The word appeared in her journals the way a scientist uses a classification. Not a name exactly, more a category. The mountain folk had different names for it across different generations. What Vera herself called it in her precise, angular handwriting was simply, it mimics. That's the core of it. Over 40 years of careful observation, my grandmother had documented encounters going back through her whole life, and encounters told to her by her own mother and grandmother of something on that mountain that learned voices, learned faces, learned the sounds a person made when they walked through their own house. It would wait. It was patient. It was particularly drawn, in Vera's analysis, to voices of the recently dead. And it used those voices to try to get people to open doors or follow sounds into the dark. I sat in that room and read my grandmother's careful handwriting by lamplight, and my hands went numb and stayed numb for about an hour. The protections in the house, the iron, the salt, the carved symbols weren't folk craft. They were a system. Vera had refined them over decades. The iron nails in the windows, a tradition going back before her mother's time, worked in some way she couldn't fully explain but had verified empirically over years. The salt along the exterior walls, the carvings in the door frames, the root cellar, the root cellar. She mentioned the root cellar the way you mention the foundation of a house, the thing everything else rests on, the most important part. I hadn't found a root cellar yet. I hadn't gone outside after dark. We slept in the house that night. The beds were made, the sheets were clean. My grandmother had made the beds before she went into the hospital for the last time. I lay in the dark with my eyes open, and it called to me. It wasn't much past 1 a.m, a sound from outside, from the direction of the mountain above the house, north-facing side. And what I heard coming from that direction, thin and far away, through the spring mountain dark, was my grandmother's voice, Vera's voice, saying my name. I sat up so fast I woke Joel. I grabbed his arm before he could make a sound and held one finger to my lips. We sat in the bed and listened. The voice came again, clearer, this time a little closer. It was her. The cadence. The particular word she always used, sweetheart, just like that. The pitch of it. I have never in my life heard a better reproduction of a human voice by anything that was not that human. And I absolutely knew, down to the bottom of me, that this was not my grandmother. My grandmother was in the ground in the Baptist churchyard in the valley. I did not go outside. We lay in that bed until morning without sleeping. The voice came 3 more times. Each time, it was a little different. Once it called from the east side of the house, once from directly below us. That last one was the worst, that sense of it beneath us. Vera's voice from under the floor, calling my name, asking me to come outside and see what she'd brought for me. At first light, I found the root cellar. It was set into the hillside at the back of the house, beneath what I'd thought was just a mound in the ground. The door was iron-banded oak, and it was secured with more hardware than any root cellar door has any right to have 3 separate padlocks, iron bolts, a chain looped through 2 iron rings. All of the iron was heavy and well-maintained, not rusted. Someone had been oiling it recently, within the past few months, recently. I found the keys after 20 minutes. When I opened the door, the smell hit me, earthy, cold, something metallic underneath, and I went down the stone steps slowly with my phone's light. The root cellar was about the size of a large bathroom. Shelves on 2 walls, still holding old jars, an iron ring in the ceiling with a hook, a small table with a tin box on it, and the walls, floor to ceiling, in several different colors of what I recognized as grease pencil and charcoal and something brown. I chose not to think too hard about. The walls were covered in writing, my grandmother's handwriting, yes, but also older writing underneath hers, the same marks recurring that I'd seen carved into the door frames. Her writing was dense and methodical, documentation, observations, dates going back 40 years. But at the bottom of the north wall, in her hand, clearly very recent, the pencil line sharp, not blurred by moisture, yet was the last entry. I photographed it before I read it. Thank God I photographed it, because what it said changed everything I thought I understood about why she left me the property. I'm not going to read it all to you, but the part I'll tell you, she knew she was dying. She knew she would be gone before spring. And she knew what that would mean for the hollow. She wrote, she left me the property because she needed me to continue it, the protections, the maintenance, the iron and the salt and the symbols in the door frames, not as superstition, as infrastructure. Without them, she believed, based on 40 years of documentation, that whatever was on that mountain would find its way into the hollow, into the road, into the town below. The last line of the last journal entry was dated 2 weeks after my grandmother died, written in that same sharp grease pencil, in her handwriting exactly, except my grandmother had been dead for 2 weeks. I read that line 3 times. Then I heard Joel at the top of the cellar stairs saying my name, and I nearly came out of my skin before I recognized his voice. I climbed up, showed him the photographs on my phone, and we stood in the spring morning light in the hollow and talked about it for a long time. That evening, an old man came to the property on foot. He'd been in the hollow for 70 years, owned the adjacent land. He'd known my grandmother since they were children. He knew what she'd been doing. He'd watched the same things she documented. He sat in her kitchen and drank the coffee I made and explained it to us patiently and completely, the way you explain something to the relative who is finally going to take over the job you've been doing for too long. He said the mountain was old. He said things lived in old mountains that didn't live anywhere else anymore. He said most of the old families in the hollow had stories, but the family whose land sat between the hollow and the mountain mine had always been the ones who kept the boundary. He said my grandmother had been the last one taking it seriously. He said when she went into the hospital the previous fall, he'd done his best with the iron and the salt, but he was 83 and it hadn't been enough. That night, whatever was on the mountain came all the way to the house. I won't describe most of it. I will tell you that it spent a long time outside every window before it came to the door. I will tell you it used 3 different voices, mine, Joel's, and my grandmother's, in combination, sometimes overlapping. I will tell you that the iron nails in the windows seemed to matter. It moved away from the windows when it was at them and circled back to them like it was testing. I will tell you the door held. I will tell you we did not open anything. I will tell you we made it to morning. We did not sell the property. I want to be clear about that because my mother called the following week and said, so you'll list it? And I had a very long conversation with her that ended with her crying and saying she was sorry she never explained and that she hoped I could forgive her. I do forgive her. She couldn't go back. She knew what going back meant, and she couldn't do it. I went back in May with the old neighbor and spent 4 days reestablishing every protection in the house. The iron, the salt, the carvings, which he showed me how to restore where they'd worn, the root cellar hardware, oiled and checked. Every window, every door, every exterior wall. We worked through it together, and at the end, I signed my name in the journal and wrote the date and what we'd done. The way my grandmother had done, the way her mother had done before her. I'm not moving there. I'm not naive about what it would take to live in that hollow full-time, managing what she managed. But I go back every 3 months to maintain the protections. Joel comes with me. We've gotten used to the voice, or as used to it as you get. My grandmother was 96 years old, and she never missed a maintenance. Never. 40 years, she wrote in her last real journal entry. The iron holds it as long as someone holds the iron. Someone has to hold the iron. I think about that every time I make the drive up the hollow. I think about that man at the gas station who said, like it was simple, like it was just a thing a person did. She did. And now, I suppose, so do I.